7 Arab men couldn't satisfy the African woman. What happened next shocked everyone. She walked into the marble palace like a storm, proud, beautiful, untouchable. 7 of the wealthiest Arab men, each with a private jet and a kingdom of their own, tried to win her heart and failed. She didn't want their money, their diamonds, or their promises. She wanted something they couldn't give. Until one night, when a man nobody expected stepped forward. What he did not only shock the 7, it changed the entire course of their lives. This isn't a love story. It's a story about power, dignity, and a truth that no amount of gold could silence. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more powerful and unforgettable stories like this to you. The Sheikh's palace in Al Wadi was no place for chaos. Everything had a place, a protocol, a purpose. From the scent of imported saffron incense drifting through gold-tipped halls, to the rhythmic footsteps of servants trained to be silent, everything was arranged for control. That's why when she entered, the silence wasn't broken by noise. It was broken by presence. Her name was Ayana. Tall, graceful, her skin a deep, radiant tone that shimmered like polished obsidian under the desert sun. Her eyes, sharp, steady, fearless, met those of the guards as if she were royalty. She wore no jewels, no veil, and no apology, just a flowing wrap of emerald silk that kissed the polished marble with every step. The invitation she held was hand-delivered by a royal advisor, one of the 7 Arab men who ruled the Wadi Banking Consortium, a closed circle of wealth and power that spanned from Doha to Casablanca. The consortium was hosting its annual private retreat, where chosen guests, often models, heiresses, scholars, and celebrities, were flown in for 5 days of excess and luxury behind heavily guarded gates. Ayana was different. She wasn't celebrity. She wasn't rich. She wasn't submissive. She was invited by Zayd Al-Karim, the youngest of the 7, a billionaire in his early 40s. Zayd wore his silence like armor. Educated in Cambridge, shaped by the desert, and feared for his brutal honesty, he had seen a video clip of Ayana in Nairobi, a moment gone viral, where she stood between armed soldiers and a group of orphaned children during a protest. That image haunted him. A woman with no protection, shielding life with only her voice. He sent the invitation out of curiosity. But when she arrived, everything changed. The other 6 men, power brokers, oil heirs, and royal cousins, were not pleased. They had seen women of all shapes and beauty. But this one, she didn't look at them like they were powerful. She looked through them. At dinner that first night, served under the moonlight in the Garden of Fountains, Ayana sat at the long table draped in white linen. She didn't laugh at their jokes. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't flirt. When the first man, Nabhan, poured her wine and made a comment about her lips, she replied in perfect Arabic, "Lust without depth is hunger. I am not here to feed you." Laughter died in their throats. She wasn't playing their game. By the second day, whispers filled the palace. The 7 men, competitive by nature, began trying to impress her. Khalid, the tech magnate, sent her a $200,000 necklace. She left on the sand outside her room. Fahd, the oil prince, flew in a private band to play outside her balcony. She shut the curtains. Imran, known for his charm, recited poetry to her at breakfast. She listened politely, then asked him if his words had ever saved a life. He said no. She smiled. "Mine have." Zayd watched from afar. Unlike the others, he hadn't spoken to her since her arrival. He observed. He studied her silences. He noticed how she knelt to speak to the cleaning girls in Swahili, how she walked barefoot in the grass at night, how she stood alone beneath the stars without ever looking lost. On the 3rd night, the tension boiled over. In the grand dining hall, after a tense meal of awkward flirtation and failed seduction, Nabhan lost his temper. "Why are you here if you don't want any of us?" he said, slamming his gold goblet down. Ayana looked up slowly. "You invited me," she said calmly, "but none of you knew why. You thought beauty was something you could tame. You thought I was another jewel for your crown, but you were wrong." Khalid snorted. "Then tell us, why are you here?" Ayana stood. Her voice was soft, but it cut like glass. "I came to see if power can kneel." If men with everything can recognize what they lack. Silence. Then a voice from the end of the table spoke. It was Zaid. And what do we lack? She turned toward him for the first time. Their eyes met. Two oceans, one of fire, one of stillness. You lack truth, she said. That night, the palace was quieter than ever. Some of the men were furious, others confused. But Zaid? He couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., he walked alone down the long stone corridor to the outer courtyard. He found Ayana there, barefoot on the sand, gazing at the stars. Her arms were crossed. The moonlight lit the lines of her face like a sculpture carved by time and dignity. "May I sit?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't stop him. He sat beside her. The silence stretched. Then she spoke. "You didn't try to impress me." "No." "Why?" "Because I didn't want to fail." She turned her face toward him. For the first time, her expression softened. "Do you know what satisfies a woman like me?" He didn't answer. Ayana placed her hand on the ground, pressed her fingers into the sand. Presence. Not gifts, not control. Just presence. Men come offering kingdoms, but they are never fully here. They fear the weight of a soul they can't conquer. Zaid looked down at his hands. He had led armies of lawyers, destroyed rivals in boardrooms, built towers in 5 cities. And yet here he was, speechless. "I want to know you," he said finally. "No," she replied gently. "You want to discover if you still have the capacity to feel me. There's a difference." They stayed there in silence for nearly an hour. Neither moved, neither touched, but something unspoken passed between them, heavier than lust, deeper than curiosity. It was surrender, and for the first time in many years, Zaid realized he hadn't brought this woman here. She had come to awaken him, and that, perhaps, was the most dangerous power of all. The desert doesn't sleep. It hums. Beneath the stars, beneath the marble, beneath the illusion of control. And inside the palace of the Wadi Consortium, the hum became a tremor. Word had spread beyond the white walls. Ayana, the woman from Nairobi, the one none of the 7 Arab kings could claim, was still in the palace, still untouched, still unimpressed. But what made the whispers louder, more dangerous, was that she had spent a full hour with Zaid al-Karim under the moonlight. The man who said nothing, the man who ruled the diamond market from Morocco to Munich, had broken his silence, and that terrified the others. By morning, Zaid's older cousin Suleiman was already plotting. He was the unofficial leader of the 7, the eldest, the one whose money funded the others' ambitions. With a falcon's instinct and a python's patience, he summoned the other 5 to a private council over strong coffee and cold judgment. "She's dangerous," he said simply. Fahd, the oil prince, still fuming from her public rejection, spat. "She's arrogant." "She's a mirror," corrected Imran reluctantly. "And we don't like what we see." Suleiman's gaze turned sharp. "Zaid is compromising our unity. He's always been a quiet one, but if he breaks pattern for her, we all lose our balance." "What do you suggest?" asked Khalid, the tech magnate. "We give him a choice." Meanwhile, Ayana stood alone on the rooftop, her wrap fluttering against the wind. Below her, the courtyard glistened with the reflection of gold tiles and peacock blue fountains. But it was the horizon that held her gaze, vast, brutal, beautiful. Zaid found her there. She didn't turn. "They'll come for you now," she said. He stood beside her, his toe brushing the stone. "I know. You disrupted the order." "I've done that before." "Not like this," she replied. "This isn't business. This is soul, and you're not allowed to have one in their world." Zaid studied her face. There was no fear in her, only awareness. "I've lived most of my life surrounded by men who worship structure," he said. "Rules, appearances. We control markets, but we never touch what matters." Ayana looked at him. "And now I'm touching it." A silence fell between them again, but this time it was no longer made of distance. It was heavy with decision. That evening, at the Majlis of Brotherhood, Zaid was summoned. The room was built like a fortress, walls lined with books of Islamic poetry, rare gems, antique maps, and swords that had never been drawn in battle but always used in metaphor. The 6 men sat in a half-circle on low cushions, with Suleiman in the center. Zayd entered, unarmed but alert. Suleiman didn't waste time. You allowed a woman to challenge the council's harmony. Zayd raised an eyebrow. A woman who was invited by you. She was meant to be admired, not listened to. She didn't come to be consumed, Zayd replied calmly. She came to be understood. Fahd interjected. She embarrassed us. No, Zayd corrected. She exposed you. A long, cold silence. Suleiman leaned forward. Zayd, this is not about romance. This is about loyalty. If you continue this path, we will not stand with you. Zayd met every eye in the room. Then don't. You would throw away your legacy, Suleiman warned. For a woman who doesn't belong here? Zayd's voice was low but firm. Perhaps none of you belong here. He turned and left the room. That night, Ayana was packing. Zayd entered her quarters without knocking, something he had never done before. Don't, he said softly, seeing the open bag. I've disrupted the hierarchy, she said, folding her scarf. So did the Prophet once. She paused. He walked over, slowly. You came here to see if power could kneel. But power doesn't kneel, Ayana. Men do, and I'm kneeling now. Not to own you, not to please you, but because you reminded me what it means to stand for something. She looked up at him, eyes full of the first flicker of pain. Do you know what happens when a man like you chooses a woman like me in this world? I lose money, he replied. I lose partnerships. I lose protection. She waited, but I gain peace. And there it was, the moment neither could take back. Ayana sat down. Her hands trembled slightly. For the first time, the woman who had stood against guns and wealth and pride looked human. Then stay, she whispered. But know this, you can't keep me. I'm not yours. I don't want to keep you, Zayd said. I want to walk beside you. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. They just sat, a woman, and a man who understood the price of silence and the weight of choice. By sunrise, Suleiman had acted, using his influence. He placed an order to freeze Zayd's assets in 3 offshore accounts, citing breach of consortium conduct. He sent a private plane to bring in an Ethiopian journalist known for scandal, and he instructed the palace security to limit Ayana's movements, for her protection, he claimed. But Ayana was one step ahead. When Zayd awoke, she was gone. No note, no call, just a faint scent of jasmine on his pillow, and a white feather tucked beneath his robe. He searched the palace. The guard said she had been escorted out by Suleiman's men. Zayd's chest tightened, not with rage, but with a calm that felt lethal. For the first time in years, he tapped his private line, called an old contact in Kenya, and activated an emergency protocol he hadn't used since his father died. Within 2 hours, he was on a jet. Destination, Addis Ababa. He had no plan, only a name, and a memory of a woman who once stood in front of armed soldiers, for people she had never met. Now it was his turn to stand for her, and for everything she had awakened in him. The air in Addis Ababa was different, heavier, more alive. It didn't yield to men in suits or soften beneath polished leather shoes. It moved with the pulse of a continent that had learned to survive storms in silence. And for the first time in decades, Zayd al-Karim walked through a city without a driver, without a translator, without protection. Only a name, only a memory, only a purpose. The airport had been discreet. Private entry through a diplomatic corridor still accessible thanks to a favor from an old contact in the UAE Foreign Office. But outside those glass doors, Zayd was a stranger. No guards, no servants, just a man in a dark linen shirt and slacks, with sand still at his shoes and fire in his chest. He didn't sleep on the flight. Instead, he stared out the window at the changing clouds, replaying every word Ayana had ever spoken, every silence, every refusal. He was used to chasing deals. But this wasn't negotiation. It was a reckoning. Her name wasn't on any hotel list. No flights to her name. No embassy logs. Zayd used a burner phone and a local SIM to contact Desta. the humanitarian coordinator he had once funded in a forgotten refugee corridor near Djibouti. The man answered on the second ring. Zaid, is this a joke? I need your help. A long pause. You left our world a long time ago. Maybe I'm trying to come back. Dest aside. What's her name? Zaid didn't answer, but he didn't need to. By the afternoon, Zaid was driven in an old Land Cruiser covered in dust, through the chaotic heart of the city, into the poorer districts where money wasn't currency, reputation was. He was led to a quiet compound with walls made of tin and laughter. Dozens of children played in the courtyard. Some were missing limbs. Others had scars deeper than skin. And in the center of them, organizing food with volunteers, was Ayana. She wasn't wearing silk. No jewels. No perfume. Just an old t-shirt, a cotton wrap, and bare feet thick with red dust. Zaid stood by the gate, frozen. He expected relief. Instead, he felt something sharper, guilt. He had seen women like her before, but never been seen by one. Ayana spotted him. She didn't smile. She didn't run. She walked slowly across the courtyard, children parting like waves. When she reached him, her voice was steady. How did you find me? I didn't, he said softly. I followed what you left behind. Her eyes scanned his face. Why are you here, Zaid? He exhaled. Because the men I stood beside are not who I want to be anymore, and the man I was becoming. I saw him in your reflection. Silence. Did they send you? She asked. He shook his head. They froze my accounts, publicly shamed me, called me weak. Ayana tilted her head. And are you? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked around. These children, are they why you left? I never left, she replied. I returned. She turned and began walking away. Zaid followed, inside a modest room filled with books, maps, and mosquito nets. Ayana poured water into 2 tin cups and sat cross-legged on a floor mat. I was born here, she said. My father died in a mining collapse. My mother raised me selling vegetables near the stadium. When I was 16, I won a scholarship to study in Nairobi. When I returned years later, I found this place. The children came from wars the world doesn't name, from borders the world pretends are stable. Zaid listened. No one comes here to impress. They come to survive and to protect. He took a sip of water. It was warm, metallic, real. Why did you accept the invitation to the palace? He asked. She looked at him. Because I wanted to remind them and myself that dignity can't be bought, that even in a cage of gold, a free soul stays untamed. Zaid lowered his eyes. You reminded me. Ayana's gaze softened slightly. But what are you going to do with that reminder? Over the next 3 days, Zaid stayed in a nearby hostel under a false name. He visited the compound daily, helping silently, carrying boxes, pouring clean water, sweeping the courtyard. The children began to warm to him. One girl, no older than 7, grabbed his sleeve and asked in Amharic if he was Ayana's husband. He didn't know what to say. Each night, he sat alone in a bare room with a fan that didn't work and a pillow that smelled of dust and honesty. He wrote in a notebook, something he hadn't done since he was 19. Thoughts like, what if I built towers to avoid ever needing roots? What if I mistook admiration for love? What if Ayana isn't a mystery to solve, but a mirror I wasn't ready to face? On the 4th morning, Ayana came to him. They've sent men. He sat up. Who? Suleiman. And the others. They're in the city. I have contacts inside the ministry. They're not here for diplomacy. Zaid stood. They want to silence this. She nodded. And you? He ran a hand over his jaw. Let them come. No, she said firmly. This place isn't made for power games. These children are innocent. Zaid looked her in the eyes. Then I'll leave. Where will you go? To them. To kneel, she asked. To end it, he said. Ayana stepped closer. Zaid. He didn't move. You came here to find me, but you also came to find yourself. Don't go backwards. I'm not. Then why face men who only understand domination? Zaid answered without flinching. Because I want them to understand what surrender truly looks like. Not to them, but to truth. Ayana blinked, and something inside her cracked. Not brokenness. Recognition. That afternoon, Zayd requested a meeting with the 7 men. Or rather, the 6 now pretending to still hold relevance. He used a personal line only Suleiman knew. "I'll come alone," he said, unarmed. They agreed. The location was a private club frequented by diplomats and oil envoys. Thick velvet curtains, whiskey older than any of the men inside, and walls that didn't speak. Zayd entered, dressed simply. Suleiman was seated at the center table, flanked by the others. He didn't rise. "You look thinner," he said dryly. "I'm clearer," Zayd replied. Imran scoffed. "You've lost everything." Zayd smiled. "No, I've lost what wasn't mine to keep." Fahd narrowed his eyes. "What do you want, Zayd?" He looked at each of them in turn. "To tell you this. I'm out. I dissolve my shares. I cut all ties. The consortium no longer has my name, my blood, or my soul." A stunned silence. Suleiman leaned forward. "You'd throw away a kingdom." Zayd shook his head. "I finally realized it was never mine. It was yours, built on fear. I want no part of it." He stood. "Men like you spend your lives controlling things you don't understand. But love, presence, truth, they can't be managed, only honored." Suleiman's lips twitched. "Then go, Prince of the Desert. Go to your Queen of the Dust. We'll see how long it lasts." Zayd turned toward the door. Without looking back, he said, "It already lasted long enough to wake me up." The compound was quiet when Zayd returned. But it wasn't a piece of sleep. It was a silence before a storm. The children had been taken to a nearby center by volunteers. The courtyard was empty. The air thick. Ayana waited in the common room, arms crossed, face unreadable. She didn't rise when he entered. "I heard," she said. Zayd didn't sit. "I said what needed to be said." She looked at him. "And what do you think that changed?" He blinked. "I thought you'd be proud." Ayana stood slowly, walked to the window, and spoke without turning around. "You think the world works like a chessboard, that once you flip the table, the game ends. But Zayd, when you defy men like Suleiman, they don't retreat. They wait." He stepped closer. "Let them." "No," she said, turning now, eyes full of something beyond anger. "You don't understand. I've seen what happens when power is humiliated in public. It doesn't forgive. It infects." Zayd furrowed his brow. "Then what should I have done? Bowed again? Let them keep their hands around my throat?" "No," she replied softly. "But I needed you to be ready. And you're not." He lowered his eyes. "Then help me be." Silence. Then Ayana whispered, "You need to know something about me before this goes any further." Zayd looked up. She walked to a small metal cabinet and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Inside was a black and white photograph. Faded. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, standing barefoot next to a man in uniform. Her eyes were already old. "That's my father," Ayana said. "He was a soldier. Not by choice, conscripted at 16. He died in a skirmish 3 days after that picture was taken." Zayd listened. "My mother tried to remarry for protection. The man she chose wasn't protect her." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I spent 3 years running, hiding, sleeping under trucks, carrying other people's water. One day I was found by a nun. She taught me to speak again, taught me to write. But nothing ever erased the voice inside me that said, 'They will always come back.'" Zayd stepped forward, slowly. "Who will?" "The men who take what isn't theirs, who smile while breaking you." She met his eyes. "I didn't come into your world to play with kings. I came to test their hearts, to see if any of them remembered how to protect without possessing." Zayd reached out. Ayana didn't step back. "I will never possess you," he said, "but I will protect you, even from myself." Her jaw trembled, but she let him hold her for the first time, not as a trophy, not as a temptation, but as a truth. The next morning, word spread quickly. News outlets in Dubai, Riyadh, and Paris broke the story. Zaid Al-Karim leaves Wadi Consortium citing ethical dispute. The article was clean, too clean. No mention of Ayana. No mention of the meeting. But the real headlines were whispered, not printed. Zaid gave it all up for her. She must have something on him. He's cursed now. Untouchable. In Nairobi, a major bank that had once partnered with his mineral fund pulled out. A German firm froze negotiations. And in Addis, a black SUV was seen circling the compound twice in the early morning hours. Ayana noticed. She kept the children inside, tightened their walking routes, and warned Zaid. "This isn't about you anymore," she said. "They'll come for me now, to make a point." Zaid clenched his jaw. "Then we make a bigger one." "No," she said. "We make a smarter one." They devised a plan, not to fight, but to illuminate. Zaid used what remained of his resources to reach out to an old contact, Nora Boss, an investigative journalist now working independently. She owed him a favor, one he had never called in. Until now, he arranged a meeting in a dusty cafe outside the city. Nora arrived wearing sunglasses, a scarf, and tension. "I was wondering when you'd fall," she said. Zaid nodded. "Then I suppose I'm calling the right person." He handed her a folder. Inside were documents, messages, and contracts, all legal, but all damning. Traces of how Suleiman and two others had used the Wadi Consortium as a financial laundering route for weapon shipments labeled as agricultural aid. "Why didn't you go public with this years ago?" she asked. "I didn't care. I was benefiting. And now," he looked toward the cafe window, "Ayana showed me what it means to live with something, not just above it." Noor exhaled. "If I publish this, it'll destroy the consortium." Zaid's voice was low. "I'm counting on it. But you'll be hunted." Zaid looked straight at her. "I already am." The story broke within 48 hours. Unlike the earlier press release, this wasn't surgical. It was an explosion. The report ran with photos, audio, account numbers. The image of Suleiman in a private meeting with a known arms supplier in Istanbul. The backlash was instant. Government investigations, asset freezes, travel bans, public outrage, and then silence, a deadly silence. Ayana knew what it meant. "They'll strike back," she said. But Zaid had changed. "I know," he said. "Let them." That night, a fire broke out near the compound storage facility. Local firemen claimed it was an electrical fault, but Ayana found a glass bottle fragment near the fence. Zaid examined it. Petrol, it had been thrown. The message was clear. You may have truth, but we still have reach. Zaid ordered security. Volunteers offered to stay, but Ayana stood firm. "We don't raise walls," she said. "We raise voices." So she held a press conference. Not in a hotel. Not in an embassy. In the courtyard. Children beside her. Local women behind her. Zaid at her side. She spoke with no notes. No teleprompter. No makeup. "I come from a land where silence used to protect us. But silence is no longer enough. Men of wealth tried to buy my story. Men of power tried to erase it. But this," she gestured around her, "this is what they can't touch. Hope, truth, humanity." The video went viral. Within 24 hours, major news outlets picked it up. She was no longer just the woman who broke the consortium. She was a symbol. And Zaid? He wasn't the prince who gave up his throne. He was a man who finally earned his place beside a queen. But even symbols bleed. The next morning, Zaid woke up to a message from Noor. One of Suleiman's proxies had been spotted in Mombasa, a known transit point. The man was carrying a list of names. Ayana's was one of them. Noor's text was short. "You have 48 hours. After that, I can't protect either of you." Zaid closed the phone and walked out into the red morning sun, where Ayana was waiting with her arms crossed, as always, as if shielding the world with nothing but skin and spirit. He looked at her and said the words she already knew were coming. "It's time to leave." The night they left Addis Ababa, the moon refused to rise. It was Ayana who insisted they walk. No cars, no noise, no trail. Zaid didn't argue. Not anymore. They slipped through back alleys, crossed an old footbridge over the river, and vanished into the dark without a single word of goodbye. The children had been moved earlier that day to a safe location under new names. The compound was locked, a place of memory now, an unfinished war. Zaid carried only a satchel, 2 passports, a phone without a SIM, a vial of morphine Ayana insisted they bring, just in case, and the notebook he'd been writing in since Nairobi. Ayana carried nothing but herself. And somehow it was enough. Their first stop was a remote village near the Kenya-Ethiopia border. No cell towers, no cameras, just a missionary doctor who owed Ayana her life. The woman welcomed them with no questions, offered a cot under a tin roof, and a bowl of water heated over coals. Zaid hadn't washed like that since childhood. He crouched in a corner, pouring water over his head, shivering, not from cold, but from memory. He felt Ayana watching from the other side of the room. "I didn't think you'd last this far," she said. "I didn't think I'd feel this alive," he replied, drying his face. She smiled, not out of joy, but acknowledgement. "You've stopped speaking like a prince." He met her gaze. "I was never a prince. I was a mask." And in that quiet, roofless space, they became something real. But reality doesn't delay danger. 2 days later, the missionary intercepted a message through the old HF radio system. A private bounty had been placed on Zaid's head, high enough to feed an entire militia for a year. No paper trail, no fingerprints. But Suleiman's signature was written in the silence between the lines. Ayana leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I told you." Zaid paced the small room, jaw tight. "He's not after revenge anymore. He's after erasure." "They always were," she said. The next night, they crossed into Kenya, on foot, through tall grasses, with only the stars to guide them. Ayana walked ahead, always 20 steps ahead. Zaid followed, limping now, his feet blistered, his body thinning. But his spirit had never been sharper. In a clearing beneath a dead tree, they rested. She sat against the trunk. He sat beside her. "I used to think survival was the end goal," Zaid said. "That if I could just get through the next deal, the next lawsuit, the next betrayal, I'd be okay." Ayana looked at him. "And now," he reached for her hand, "now I want something more dangerous." "Which is?" He turned to her. "Peace." She smiled, but her eyes filled with tears. "Then you're not running anymore." "No," he said. "I'm walking toward it." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, the world held its breath. In Moyo, a dusty border town, they took refuge in a market cellar run by a man who once helped Ayana hide weapons during a student uprising. He offered them a bed of straw, warm soup, and a single oil lamp. That night, Ayana awoke to the sound of whispering. She crawled toward the cellar door. Zaid was outside, talking to a child. The boy couldn't have been older than 10. He held a sling over his shoulder and a bruised eye. He was showing Zaid how to light the lamp more efficiently. Zaid, kneeling beside him, listened carefully, nodding with patience and wonder. Ayana watched in silence. This man, who once lived in penthouses, who once dined with presidents, was now learning from a barefoot boy with a sling. And he looked free. They traveled south, avoiding roads, hitching rides in livestock trucks, sometimes walking for miles. Zaid's beard grew in. His hands grew calloused. Ayana, who once kept herself armored by silence, began to hum. She hummed as they crossed rivers. She hummed as they chased shade under acacia trees. She hummed when Zaid's feet bled, and she had to carry his weight with her arm around his waist. "You always hum when you're scared," he said once. She laughed. "No, I hum when I remember I'm still alive." By the time they reached Isiolo, Ayana collapsed. Fever, dehydration, infection. Zaid carried her into a church-turned clinic and demanded help. The nurse, a retired field medic from Sudan, took one look at her and shook his head. "You should have come 2 days ago." Zaid nearly broke. He sat at her bedside, holding her hand through the night. She was unconscious, burning, whispering names from her past. Her father, her mother, Zaid's name once. He placed a cold cloth on her forehead and whispered back, "You don't leave me now." Not when I just found my soul. He took out the morphine, thought about it, then set it aside. Not unless she asks, he whispered to himself. Ayana survived. Barely. When she woke up, her first word was water. Her second was stay. Zaid cried. He didn't hide it. He wasn't that man anymore. 3 weeks later, she could walk again. They were thinner, tanned by sun and fire, shaped by fear and grace. But they had something no bounty could erase. Time, and the will to use it. In Nanyuki, at the base of Mount Kenya, they rented a hut with the help of a local teacher. It had no internet, no mirrors, no past, just a garden, and 2 people willing to plant something new. Each day, Zaid wrote in his notebook. Each day, Ayana spoke to women in the village, teaching them about rights, about breath, about standing even when the world says kneel. One morning, Zaid asked her, "What if we built something here?" She looked at him. A school, for girls, for orphans, for anyone who wanted a voice. Ayana nodded. "But not in our name," she said. "In theirs." Zaid smiled, agreed. One night, months later, a man arrived with an envelope. He wore civilian clothes, carried no weapon, but his accent was unmistakably Saudi. He gave Zaid the envelope and said only, "Suleiman is dead." Zaid didn't flinch. "How?" The man smiled. "He died like he lived. Alone, in a tower no one will remember." Inside the envelope was a photo of the Wadi Palace, abandoned, overgrown, forgotten. Zaid stared at it for a long time, then handed it to Ayana. She looked once, then threw it into the fire. "I never needed to see it burn," she said. Zaid nodded. "I just needed to stop carrying the map." They held hands and watched it turn to ash. 5 years later, the school sat on a ridge facing the sunrise. No gate, no fence, just 3 long buildings painted in warm clay colors, open to the breeze. Children ran freely between classes. Their laughter echoed off the hills. At the center of the compound stood a simple tree, acacia wide and stubborn, under which the first lessons had been taught. It was called the House with No Walls. There was no sign bearing Zaid's name, no plaque honoring Ayana. And yet, their presence was everywhere. In the books with hand-stitched covers, in the water pumps powered by solar panels, in the voices of children now fluent in both Swahili and English, and in the gardens that bloomed where once there had only been dust. Zaid stood at the far edge of the compound that morning, holding a basket of seeds. His beard was streaked with gray now, his hands tanned and rough, and his frame lean from work, not wealth. He bent down and placed seeds into the earth with the patience of a man who once thought speed was strength. Behind him, a voice called gently, "You're still planting in the dry months." He smiled without turning. "I've learned that even the driest months hold water, if you trust the ground long enough." Ayana walked toward him, barefoot as always. She was wearing a yellow dress with a woven belt made by the older girls at the school. Her hair was now threaded with silver strands, but her eyes had lost none of their fire. "Have you seen today's letter from the UN?" she asked. He nodded. "They want to send someone to study the school's model." "And you're still not impressed?" "I'm impressed by what they don't see," he said. "No walls, no title, no spotlight." She touched his arm. "You're still learning how to accept peace." He looked at her. Every day. That evening, after the children were fed and the lanterns lit, Zaid sat outside their small house with a notebook in his lap. Not the old black one from years ago. That one was full. This was a new book, bound in goatskin, a gift from Ayana on their 4th freedom anniversary. He began to write. "There are moments when I still wake up reaching for a phone that no longer rings. There are nights when the silence feels loud, because I was trained to be busy, not present. But then I look at her, and I remember that presence isn't silence. It's listening." Ayana emerged with 2 cups of tea. She handed him one, then sat cross-legged beside him on the wooden steps. "You were writing again?" "Always." "Still recording the past?" "No," he said. "Today I started writing the future." She smiled. "Will it be louder than the past?" "No," he said softly. It will be truer. They sipped in silence, watching the stars blink awake. The next day, a visitor arrived. She was young, maybe 28, with French braids, a bright scarf, and eyes full of urgency. Her name was Layla, a journalist from Dakar who had read about Ayana's work through a grassroots feminist magazine. She wanted an interview. Ayana declined at first, but Zaid strangely encouraged it. "Tell it once," he said, "and tell it well." So they sat beneath the acacia tree. No cameras, just a recorder and a notebook. Layla asked, "What made you walk away from the palace?" Ayana replied, "I didn't walk away from the palace. I walked toward my people." "And what about the man who followed you?" She looked toward Zaid, who was sweeping sand from the classroom doorway. "He wasn't following me. He was following something he hadn't heard in years, truth. And did he find it?" Ayana smiled. "No, but he found a place where it's welcomed." After Layla left, Zaid asked her something he hadn't asked in years. "Do you miss it?" She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The noise, the speed, the challenge of it all." She thought for a long time. "I miss being underestimated," she said finally. "It gave me a fire I thought I needed. And now, she said, I don't burn to prove. I burn to heal." Zaid leaned back, letting the wind play in his shirt. "That's what I never learned. I burn to build towers. You burn to grow things." She placed her hand over his chest. Even ashes feed the soil. Months later, a letter arrived from Desta, the humanitarian worker who had helped Zaid back in Addis. Inside was a simple note. "The tower fell, but the seeds remain. I see them blooming everywhere." Attached was a photo. Children in 3 countries holding up notebooks printed with the same logo as Ayana's school, an open hand with no flag. Zaid folded the letter slowly, then turned to Ayana, standing barefoot by the garden fence. "They're watching," he said, "from the old world." Ayana didn't blink. "Let them. We're not hiding anymore." He approached her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you still afraid?" he whispered. "No," she said. "I'm finally whole." That evening, a storm rolled in. Rain pounded the roof. The children screamed and danced and splashed barefoot in the courtyard. Teachers ran after them with blankets, laughing, helpless. Zaid and Ayana stood in the doorway, watching it all. She leaned into him. "I used to think freedom meant safety," she said. "But it doesn't." "What does it mean?" he asked. She looked up at the sky. "It means choosing who you walk with, even through fire." He kissed her forehead, and for the first time in either of their lives, they didn't feel chased. They felt chosen.